We work hard as physicians to take care of the health and well-being of our patients. But when it comes to our money, do we have the same condition of care? Probably not. Let's change that together. Welcome to the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast, where we'll fight and advocate for your financial literacy. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. Thanks for being here. Let's jump into the show. Hey guys, I want to welcome you guys to the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. We've got a great episode this week. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button as well as the notifications bell, and be sure to like, comment, and share if you like this episode. And we'll get into this week's sponsor and show. This week's episode is sponsored by CityVest. CityVest has quickly become the most popular and best way for doctors to invest in top-performing real estate private equity funds that are usually reserved for institutional investors. This unique access to investing in these institutional funds is available for the first time ever through CityVest's easy and secure online investment platform. CityVest does the hard work of conducting due diligence and vetting the investments. They even get a third-party due diligence report that is posted on their website. As a result of aggregating a several $million investment amount into their access funds, CityVest gains access to investing in the institutional investment and is able to negotiate better investment terms, such as a 12% preferred return. You can check them out at cityvest.com or go to the link in the show notes below. Now on to the show. Welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And my mission is to empower physicians to achieve financial independence and financial freedom early on so that they can practice medicine on their own terms as opposed to having to practice. So I tout 4 types of freedom. The first is financial, second is emotional, time, and location freedom. And my mission is to bring guests that are doing innovative, creative things outside the box and to show you what's possible so that you can design your best life in your business, finance, career, family, and relationships. So without much ado, we'll bring on this week's guest. So welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. And I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, the mission of Financial Freedom for Physicians is to empower physicians to achieve financial independence so that they can create their best lives and practice medicine on their own terms because they want to. And so what I do is I bring guests that are doing very interesting things, very creative things, just very novel things. And so today I have actually a kindred guest. It's Dr. Debra Blaine, and we both met back in 2019, and since then I've seen her grow as a fiction writer, and a lot of her writing reminds me of the author Michael Crichton and John Grisham. So she's the author of Code Blue, The Other End of the Stethoscope, which is published on Amazon, as well as her newest novel, Undue Influences. And what's interesting is, it takes quite a lot of skill to be good at writing fiction, for people, for mass consumption and people willing to pay and buy for the book and really enjoy it. So I brought her on, and she's going to talk all about her background, her story, and her book. So Debra, welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate coming on, and I've loved following your posts and watching you grow, and I just love what you're doing for all of us to help us find some passion and fulfillment in what we do and not just slog away all the time.
Yeah, I was mentioning it. It's one of my passions is to find just diamonds and gems and just undiscovered treasures, and just try and bring awareness to that. So tell us about your story and your background and how you got started and all of that.
Okay, so I have been practicing medicine for over 30 years. I'm kind of done. I'm now doing part-time because my son is off my payroll.
Yeah.
But way back 100 years ago, when I was in college, I was more of a liberal arts major. And I even started a graduate program in comparative religion at Temple University.
Uh-huh.
And then I think I just caved to the pressures of my family because the only thing that was really acceptable for me to be was a doctor, lawyer, or engineer.
Uh-huh.
So
Same
be that
here.
as it may, yeah, right. So it's interesting because now I'm living for me and not for other people. But at the time, I wasn't really strong enough to say no, that's not what I want. So I went back and I went to medical school and became a doctor. And then I had a kid, and I still had all these ideas about what I was going to do with medical ethics and all these. Then I had a kid, and I became a single parent, and I think life just became about survival for a long time.
Mm, mm,
And I ended up doing urgent care because I didn't have to take call in the hospital. I didn't have to, be getting up at the crack of dawn to go round on patients or coming home late. I had sort of regular hours, and that's what I needed for my son.
mhm,
And then I kind of lived for my son, I think, which I think is something that women especially do. And
mhm,
then he left the nest. And I always say that, the most important thing we can do for our children is teach them to live without us.
mhm.
And I have excelled tremendously. So my son is now like off on his own, doesn't really need mom. And, and then I sort of like, okay, now what do I want to do? Who am I? What do I want to be when I grow up?
Mhm,
I started writing Code Blue more because out of just complete frustration and a kind of anger at the way that the American healthcare system has let us physicians down.
uh-huh,
And I'm really starting to see that as medicine's failure to physicians as opposed to physicians' failure in medicine, which is
mhm,
how we were sort of taught to think of ourselves as, oh, you can't cut it, you can't do it, what's wrong with you, you're not tough.
mhm,
I think that medicine has become very unreasonable. So I started writing this book. I also started looking for options. I talked to this wonderful coach, Heather Fork, which I think a lot of people know Heather Fork and
yeah.
start with her. And she pointed me in several directions. One of them was to Seek. And I went to the physicians writing conference there.
Mhm,
And but I had started writing, but I was just writing little, like the thought of writing a whole book was so daunting and overwhelming.
mhm,
Like, how do you do that? But I saw someone who he spoke at our synagogue and he had a book and he had little vignettes about his life. And I said, well, I could do that. I could write little patient encounters and I started doing that. And each one was, it's taken in Code Blue, every patient encounter is based on reality. But of course, I changed names and ages and, sides of the body and whatever. But it made it, first of all, I enjoyed writing
uh-huh,
about it. And also, it made it so much more palatable because when somebody was being so obnoxious and so difficult, instead of getting, like my stomach all, in knots, I would just think, I'm going to write about that. And the more outrageous the story, the better it was for the book. So it put a whole different spin on difficulties in the office. And then I went to Seek and I met this guy, Rich Crivolin, he's actually a screenwriter. He's retired faculty from University of Southern California.
mhm,
And he came around and gave us, a few minutes of his time for free. And then I hired him as like my mentor.
uh-huh,
And he really helped me with Code Blue. So I went to his workshop and he said, well, so I had to decide, do I want this to be fiction or nonfiction? And I
uh-huh,
didn't want it to be nonfiction because then I could be liable, like, well, what office are you working in? And what are you saying about our office? And what are you saying about our practice? So
mhm,
I didn't want to have to deal with any of that. So I made it a fiction.
mhm,
And as a fiction, then you need a plot. You need a hero, you need a villain, you need obstacles, you need there's all these things that you need.
uh-huh,
And so that's where Rich came in. I worked with him for probably 6 months and he taught me so much about how to write in a way that was compelling. Hopefully I succeeded.
mhm,
And then it was, I wrote this thriller about the Russian oligarchs. Sorry, anyone else there who's Russian, somebody once complained about that, but somebody's got to be the villain. So anyway, they hack into our EMRs and they steal information and they use it to extort millions of dollars from the patients, and then they murder them. And the doctor that you follow around during the course of her day becomes a target for the Russians. And there's more detail in that, but I don't want to give it away. But and at one point, I was told, you did such a great job with this thriller part. You don't really need all that office stuff. And I was like, no, that was why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I needed to say what I was saying. I needed people to be able to read it, like, especially people who are not in medicine, to be able to read it and say, wow, that really happens to you. Wow, you can't just, prescribe a medication or order a test, or, these people are that demanding sometime, So I really needed to do that. And it was a lot of fun. It was very cathartic in a lot of ways. So after that, I looked at the book and I said to myself, I said, I don't like what I'm doing. I hate my life. I hate my day job. And I don't want to do this anymore. And that was really, a lot of your posts are about authenticity. And, and that really kind of brought it home to me that, why am I doing this? Why am I spending day after day after day doing something that not only doesn't resonate with me, but I'm suffering from it? So I left. I took 11 months off. I became certified as a coach, and I do coaching, and I want to kind of ramp that up a little bit. And then I started working on the second book because I discovered I really like to write. Yeah. And then the pandemic happened. And all I could think of was my grandchildren asking me one day, so Grandma, what were you doing during the pandemic? And I saying, oh, I had taken off. And I felt sort of embarrassed by that. So I went back part-time because I wanted to help out. I'm completely over that now. I did my assistance, and now I'm looking more in a permanent fashion to get off the hamster wheel. But then so for me, when I write a book, and I think the second book is so much more polished and mature, I just feel like I grew as a writer. Yeah. And my second book, I only started with three things. I had an opening scene in my head because Rich taught me that you always want to start with something that grabs the reader, that pulls them in. And you also want to make your reader care about your characters. Like, it has to be like, why should I care what happened to this kid, Joshua? Who cares? Who's Joshua? So I had this opening scene in my head. I knew I wanted to do something with the flower, the devil's breath, which is Vice called it the scariest drug on the world. And I kind of knew where I wanted to talk about extremism in this country. And because I'm very much a moderate. I mean, do you remember, Chris, what was the time we could have gone out and, had a whole heated debate over political things. We could have disagreed on everything. We could have argued, and I don't win. You're not taking it into this account. And then afterwards we could say, okay, where are we going for lunch? Yeah. Right? Yeah, because exactly. It was like, okay, so we don't agree. So what? Yeah. But something has happened in our culture, and nobody can do that anymore. And there's nobody listens to each other. Nobody respects each other if they have a different opinion. Yeah. And so that was what I wanted to write the book about. And then, but I didn't have, like in the first case, I had an outline because Rich made me do an outline. In the second case, I didn't really have an outline. I didn't know exactly where I was going. And when I finally realized I couldn't solve the problems of the world in one book, then I was able to kind of close it up. And I'm writing a sequel now. Okay. And so my goal is really to write and to do more coaching. And so I coach medical professionals, but I also am starting to coach writers, and not for tips and things. I can't, writers are like disenchanted physicians, very, very supportive of each other. And somebody wants some tips on characters or, things like that. I can't charge them for that. But if somebody wants me to follow with them as they write their book, and means I have to read their stuff and we talk about it, that I would have to charge for because it's a lot of time. Yeah. So that's the other thing I'm starting to do, and I'm starting to increase my coaching practice. And I am determined to be out of the clinical sphere in the next 12 months. Nice. I'm just done. Like I had 2 days back to back where I saw, I mean, so I'm doing urgent care. I mean, it's like, they want you to see 7, 8 patients an hour, and they're not all nose swabs,
Yeah.
And I just asked myself, because I talk to myself all the time. I asked myself at the end, I said, have you had enough yet?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I realized there was like 2 parts of me. There was the part that said, yes, I've had enough, I want out. And there's that other part that was like, no, I can do it. I'm tough, I can do it. I'm strong, and I'm like, no, who's talking here? That's not,
Yeah.
and I realized the reason I'm still doing clinical medicine is because some part of me still sees myself as a clinician. And so I'm really working on a transformation of sorts so that I can get out and be productive and be lucrative and help other people like you do.
like all of us. So, but what's interesting is, I like your journey where you're just using creative writing as an outlet, like John Grisham. When I was reading his bio, he was doing it, and all of a sudden he has his first bestseller. So, and what's interesting is that a lot of people think creative writing is just scattered and all of this, but there's actually a structure to it, and there's actually plots, and there's how to write. So that's quite interesting and compelling. So, and what sort of resources did besides mentoring and coaching did you take advantage of to help write your book, and how can physicians who are interested in creative writing start?
So as far as researching my topics, so I use the internet a lot, which is like, something John Grisham might not have had, been able to avail of himself of 30 years ago, at least not as easily. But researching the devil's breath flower and where it grows and what it does and who used it and what did they mix it with. So, and what else was that drug used for in this country, and that the Nazis used it for. So that stuff is, whatever was available on the internet, I was able to grab and incorporate. What was your other question? What did I think I've always enjoyed writing. I had a professor in college, an intellectual history professor, and he was fabulous. And one of the things he used to do with my papers, though, was he used to like draw lines through it. It used to break my heart. It was, like Occam's razor, like, you don't need this, you don't need this. But I love that paragraph. I love that sentence. And it, but he got me over that idea. And I think it's something that a lot of writers go through, is like, you write something and now it's yours and it's your baby and you don't want to get rid of it. But it gets easier, to say, okay, I really like that, but it doesn't add, it's not, it's kind of taking things in a different, I'm not focused with that. And what I did sometimes was I would take that piece, and I had a whole folder on my computer that was like bits and pieces. I think I called it bits and pieces. And I would put stuff in there that I wasn't ready to part with. Like, I might want to use this sometime. So the beauty of having, doing software, like have a Word document, like a Word program, is you can save it. You can save it forever. but it doesn't belong in your book right now.
Yeah.
And Rich taught me things like, how do you keep suspense going? Like, he taught me never to end a chapter in a soft way, like where you feel like you're done for now. Like, always end a chapter with a question. Always end a chapter wanting your reader to wonder, okay, what happens next? And then flip the page, and so that they keep on reading, and so that each at the end of everything is still getting you to want to read more.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think that characters, and I don't really know who taught me to do this. I think I just did it, but I become my characters when I'm writing, like, and each character is different. So maybe I'm a little schizophrenic and that's why I can do that. But it's like, I sort of enter that character and their persona, and then I can talk the way they talk, or I can think, oh no, they wouldn't do this. I have one character in Undue Influences who, it's like, I wanted things to go one way, and the character told me, no, I didn't do that. And it was, and then it was it took me so almost the end of the book to get that all worked out, because that character was now in trouble for something that the character said that they didn't do. So, but I think just, sort of entering into them and seeing how they would interact. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's so much fun. You create these people and they become real, even though they're not, they're not real. And I think that medicine actually helps because we've seen so many personalities. And we've seen so many, how people have had to deal with things and why, and what their strategies, their coping strategies are. And we can draw from any number of those and create a whole person around it.
Yeah. I love, sometimes writing is just, it's therapeutic, it's cathartic, it's very productive, and just writing serves so many different purposes. So, one question I had is, how do you know, is it a feeling when you're at the end of the book? Is it, is it something the book you planned the ending, or is it just sort of something, it's like you sort of like a project and you sort of feel, it's tie up loose ends and, that's the completion? I'm just curious for my own sake.
So I think it's really important. I've been reading like masterclass stuff, and they tell you, you make a promise to your reader that you're going to answer certain questions. You better answer the questions. My first book, I knew exactly how I wanted it to end. Like I had the last sentence of the book. My second book, I had no clue how it was going to end. And when I finally got to it, because I had to get somebody out of trouble, and it was like, oh yeah, that's perfect. And I was really happy with that ending. It's just, I think that it's really important though, that you can kill off people, but you have to give the reader a feeling of things ended in a good way for them. Like you don't want them to be so disappointed, like Game of Thrones, season 8. I don't know. Like, what the hell was that? I mean, that was not an ending. We went through all those seasons, and that's how you ended. And you didn't even there's so many things that weren't addressed. I mean, you don't want to do that. You want things to be tied up neatly, and you want there to be some emotional satisfaction for the reader. Even if somebody has to die for it, but it's like, it's an understandable part of life maybe, or, and some of the bad guys can be killed, and even some of the good guys can sometimes get killed, but you have to sort of satisfy the reader. Or they'll never pick up another one of your books.
And what's interesting is that it sounds like creative writing is just something, it's a skill that can be it's a passion, and it's a skill that can be honed and developed, and is you from your voice and your facial expressions, I can tell it's like very, very therapeutic, and it's something that physicians can do in their spare time, and it's contributes to their overall happiness. So
I think we all need to have something we really enjoy. I mean, unless you love slogging away in the office, and and some people are doing things that they really do love. But for those times when it's just really it's just really repetitive, busy work, and you feel that the leadership's coming down on you, and the patients are all reviewing you, and the whatever, and the insurance companies aren't cooperating, and so. I think you need to have some outlet that's just for you. And something that you can feel like, okay, I can just get away, whether it's painting or writing or horseback riding, or I think we need to have that for ourselves. I mean, I remember when I was in medical school, we started off with a week between rotations, and then it was a weekend, and then it was, hardly anything at all. And there was a certain point where I was like, what did I used to do to have fun? And that carried over for a long time. Like I couldn't remember. And I've done some interesting things. I mean, I went rappelling, rock climbing, scuba diving, skydiving. I mean, I've done some really cool things that I enjoyed, but then it was like, what did I used to do? Like, can we rent a kayak? Oh yeah, I guess we could do that. That's only an afternoon. I can do that, So, but the other thing just to say is that, I didn't completely do it out of the blue, even though I had this history, but it was 30 years old. When I started writing Code Blue, I did take an online writing course, a beginner's writing course. It was $89, University of Wisconsin or something. I don't even think they offer the course right now, but I'm sure there's others. And it was like 2 lessons a week for 8 weeks or 12 weeks. It was the best $89 I ever spent. It was just sort of a review of grammar, of how you write things, like how do you like you're not supposed to change voice in the middle of a paragraph.
Okay.
If I'm writing a paragraph and you're speaking, then I have to make a new paragraph for somebody else to speak. Otherwise it's confusing to the reader. So things that I had never thought about, but it just gave a lot of those little things that were really helpful.
Wow, that's quite interesting. Yeah, I'll be sure to look that up and put the link in the show notes. So what are you working on now? I know you mentioned coaching, you're thinking about your next book, and let the audience know, how they can contact and reach you.
Oh, sure. So you can contact me through my website, debrablaine.com. I am writing a sequel to the second book because, as I had discovered, I can't solve the problems of the world in one book. I can't solve the problems of the world in 2 or 3 books, but I kind of came to a closing state, and now I'm moving on. This next book takes place about 12 or 13 years in the future. And so I'm doing that. I'm thinking about getting into medical writing, but I'm also considering just really developing my coaching practice and focusing on writing. So this time around, I used the same publishing company, Warren Publishing. And this time around, they've got some new people doing marketing. Okay. And so I have a lot of hope for that. So, and I got myself into a couple of cool bookstores, and nice. I'm going to do some, speaking events, which, everything got shut down during COVID. So that was kind of tough. And I'm finding that the second book is helping sales of the first book. And I feel like if I could get 5 or 6 or 7 books out there and a coaching practice, then I could say sayonara to clinical medicine.
So, yeah. Well, that's wonderful. It's great to see your progression since 2019, and I know you had some book signings. So I know once this pandemic is over, all these in-person events, so I think your practice and your writing is gonna take off. So
thank you.
Yeah. Any last parting words of wisdom before we say bye?
I would say, like, if you're interested in writing, you should write.
Yeah.
And don't let it intimidate you. And don't necessarily think about writing an entire book. It's not going to happen in an afternoon. And don't even think about the whole project at once. Think about doing parts of the project, and don't edit while you're writing. Like if you write a paragraph and say, oh, that's not exactly the word I meant, and you just bog yourself down, you won't get anywhere. Just, they call it a word dump. Just write whatever comes to mind. And then later you can go back and edit it. Sometimes I'll put things in red, because I know that's not really what I wanted to say. I use a thesaurus a lot when I write, because I know there's, maybe I'm just losing my mind because I'm older, but I know there's a better word for that, but instead of spending time thinking of it, I put it in red and I'll come back later and I'll say, oh yeah, I want to look that up. So, and I'd say, and not just for writing, but spend time on yourself. Time is going by, and we always think we have tomorrow, but tomorrow is elusive. It's not for, unfortunately, we've learned that with COVID, that for some people there isn't tomorrow. And we have to, our lives are precious and we need to make the most of it and enjoy it the best that we can. You said it so well, and nothing's guaranteed in life. And thanks so much for being on the show. Congratulations on the book and all of your success. And we'll have you on in future episodes, talk about choosing a publisher and hybrid publishing, self-publishing. So we look forward to that. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
What a fantastic show. I hope you enjoyed our very special guest. Just remember, as a shout out to our this week's sponsor, cityvest.com. Cityvest gives you access to the best real estate private equity funds with enhanced investment terms, verified due diligence, and lower risk. You can check them out at cityvest.com or click on the link in the show notes below to hear about their upcoming investment offerings.
I'm excited that you made it for another episode. You are truly the best. If you've been following the show for a while, you know that my passion is to bring you the education you need to find your path to financial freedom. Please come back week after week for new content, new resources, and great guests. Until then, if you haven't already, please be sure to check out the website, www.drchrislumdphd.com for more support. I'll see you next week.